So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Mel Young. I'm one of the co-founders of the Elders Council for Social Entrepreneurs, along with Chris and Andrea. And it's my duty today just to introduce the Elders Council for Social Entrepreneurs to you. We've been established for a few years now. Our focus is on the issues of exit strategies, the issues of challenges around that, about how we look after the sector properly, so that we've got longer term sustainability for the organizations, but also for for our people and ourselves. So some of this is about the work we do is about us as individual social entrepreneurs, individual people, but also about the sector. And as you'll know, some of you have participated and spoken on it. We've had some great discussions on the webinars. We're also pushing away with doing the Wisdom Bank, being out there doing meetings. And I think what we're finding is just a great deal of interest in this area. So I'm going to hand over to Andrea at the moment, who's going to introduce our speaker, a fabulous speaker, and the topic. But the one thing I'd just like to remind you, please, is that this is being recorded, and then it's going to be shared publicly. So if you've got an issue with that, if you could get in touch with Caitlin, whose email's in the chat. And she'll sort you out with arrangements of that. But just to be very clear, this is being recorded and will be shared on our website. And please put your questions and everything in the chat when the talks go on, and then we'll get back and hopefully answer your queries and get a good discussion going. So great to see you all. Very, very welcome. And I'll hand over now to Andrea. Andrea.
Thanks, Mel, so much. Hello, everyone from all over the world. We're delighted that you've joined us today. And of course, we're all of us in the social enterprise community are very well aware of the issue of what people call founder syndrome. And we're very fortunate indeed to have Susanna, who studied this for many years and has also been in the social enterprise community herself as a practitioner, and so her view on this is very, very welcome, and I'm fascinated to listen. Just to say that the Elders Council has been really focusing on succession and transition because it is fundamental to each of us as individuals. And you know, people do refer to it, you know, we've been diagnosed with a syndrome, a founder's syndrome. So I'd love to hear, we'd all love to hear from you, Susanna. Susanna is at the Skull Centre for Social Enterprise in Oxford, and she studied this for a long time, and we'd just love to hear your wisdom here about it, about this issue. Susanna, handing over to you.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and it's such a pleasure to be here with all of you. It is amazing in this age where we really can feel so connected, even though I know we are all over the world at different times of the day. And I just want to say thank you so much to the Elders Council for inviting me to talk about this topic. I'm going to just call out the fact that this is a controversial topic. And it often, you know, people have strong views on it, which are welcome here. You know, as Andrea mentioned, my interest in this actually comes from being a practitioner when I worked in Canada in the nonprofit and social enterprise sphere. You know, back then, social enterprise was early. You know, it was a little bit messier than it is now. But so much of my thinking around this and my research is grounded in knowing what happens on the ground, knowing how people experience this. And that's what you're going to see in what I'm going to share today, which is a snapshot of my research to date. So I've been studying this for almost a decade now. And what I'm going to share is kind of highlights from different studies. Yeah, and I think, as we've mentioned, you can put questions in. I want to leave this as kind of, I want to make this kind of a flowy process. So if there ends up being something, you know, a question that's relevant in the moment as I'm speaking, I might address it, or we'll just wait for the Q&A after. So I'm just going to share my slides. Okay. Can you all see that? Yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah, thank you, Susanna.
Thanks, Andrea. So I just want to say, I know I have a number of friends in the audience here, a number of colleagues, and I so appreciate you all being here. And some of you have followed my work from the beginning. One of my mentors, Patricia Bradshaw, has supported me in this for 20 years, I'm going to say. So it's just so special to be able to share this. So to kind of ground where I am personally coming from in all this, and why I think it's important to share these kinds of things is, let me see if this will let me. There we go. I just want to share a little bit of my sort of personal mission, personal professional mission, which kind of plays into everything I do. So much of what I want to do is empower by shedding light on that which is seemingly unseen. And I think founder syndrome is this thing that's sort of floating in the ethers, has been floating in the ethers in the social impact sector forever. And in fact, no one even knows where the term came from, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but it's there and it's kind of invisible. And, you know, having seen some of it firsthand is why I wanted to sort of unearth like a shadow, so to speak, but really so that we can all look at it and hopefully learn from it. And related to that, I want to prevent toxic workplaces. And this is something that, you know, when Chris and I were first talking about me coming to do this, and a little bit about the Elders Council, that was something that I loved that we were aligned on, that really the goal is to set up to make sure that as much as possible, we're creating supportive workplaces all around. So when we think about founder leadership in a larger sense, and we have this, you know, if you think about, there's a startup, the founding stage, and then there's always that critical point when you're about to reach maturity or you're about to scale. And later on, you're kind of in this established stage. So it's like when the scaling is sort of at a sustainable stage. And from what I've seen in the research, that critical point of the transition to maturity is the thing to pay attention to, because the skills that founders need at the beginning, which are sometimes messy, and this like fire to move forward and the vision and all that is very much needed at that beginning stage. The critical moment happens in that transition moment when it's important for us to ask ourselves, do we have this, is it the same skills that are going to get us to the next stage? And if the answer is no, then does that mean we need to think about other leaders? Does that mean we need to get retrained? What does that mean? What kind of support can we get? So what I have seen in my research is when a founder asks themselves those questions at that moment, then it prevents a lot of what could happen later. But if the founder just kind of continues as is and does not ask these questions and just kind of assumes that the same tricks sort of that got you to that stage are going to help you get to the, you know, help you grow, then that's where we can have quite a few challenges that will affect the whole system and actually get in the way of growth as well. That's where, you know, that's the sort of catch-22 of it all. It's all very interconnected. So just to talk about the definition of founder syndrome, you know, when I first started being interested in this in the sort of academic sense, first of all, I would have thought this would have been already studied. That's really what I thought, because to me, it was such a big issue. And when I figured out it really wasn't, and that there's only been a couple of, at the point when I started studying this, there was only 1 or 2 studies, and still now there's very few that specifically looked at the issue. And so there wasn't, I haven't really seen a coherent definition of founder syndrome. So I created one a few years ago. So my definition of it is a malady that affects founders who are primarily driven by the need to control without clear delegation or succession planning, often using defense strategies such as dominance to maintain legitimacy. And there's a second part to the definition, and this is what I really found when I was doing my doctoral work, that within the organization, this often results in dysfunctional leadership and management practices and a social structure that forms around the founder to protect their image in the public eye. So I know that's loaded and I know there's a lot in there and I'm going to unpack it and explain it, but the public eye element of it all turned out to be and continues to be an important element of what happens within the organization, which, is not always immediately obvious. So to get into, there's, I always like to circle control. So if we get a little bit more specific about what symptoms we're talking about, that the organization's image is strongly identified with the founder. In addition to that, there's high level of micromanagement by the founder, high levels of turnover in the organization. And I just want to emphasize here the, high levels, because of course there's always going to be some turnover. That's not, that's to be expected. We're talking about extraordinary levels of turnover. Just one of my cases comes to mind where I think within 2 years, and this is not that big of an organization, 2 or 3 years, they had like 100 people turnover. And so that's what I'm talking about. High levels where there's really something to look at. The view of the founder is the only view that matters. So that decision-making element becomes really important in terms of how the process works. And again, because mostly I look at founders that are past that critical growth stage, we're talking about if we now have a large sort of established organization, why is the view of the founder still the only view that matters, right? Especially when we might have a strong leadership team, or we want to have a strong leadership team. This is when I would ask the question of what's really going on. And of course, succession planning. This is the meaty one. This is the one that sometimes is very tricky, because sometimes I have seen there are organizations that have succession plans in writing, or to meet a certain standard or something like that. But in practice, they're really never implemented, or there's always some reason where they won't be implemented. And that's really when we have to ask why. Why does that keep happening? And I'm going to share a little bit later some insights from a study I have that's about how boards work with founders with founder syndrome, and you're going to see some of those dynamics come into play. So what makes founders unique? I mean, founders in one way are like many other CEOs, like many other executives or executive directors, but also the founder is unique because they are the parent of the organization or parents of the organization, right? So they literally did give birth to it. And so there's this element of, again, decision-making that's becomes a little bit different than any other executive. So the founder decides who is on the initial board of directors, which is very important. They decide the mission and vision of the organization. And even though other people might contribute to the way those two things are updated in the future, it is still the founder that created that blueprint in the first place. What the HR policies are, I know I have a good friend in the audience who's an HR expert, and her and I often talk about what is the role of HR. Because, in some of the organizations where I've seen some challenges around founder syndrome, HR has not offered any safe space for any of the employees. And, that becomes a bit of a challenge. And of course, whether or not the founder can ever be fired, because if it's any other executive, they were brought in by the board. So of course they can be fired because the board hired them. But when we're talking about the founder, technically they can't be fired. But of course we have seen all kinds of situations where founders have been pushed out for various reasons. But, the board element and this specific element of whether the founder can be fired becomes really important. I just want to share with you a quote of a founder I interviewed who does have founder syndrome. And this is how he was explaining the board to me. He said, you see, founders have a rather unique relationship with boards because in the ordinary course of things, boards choose CEOs, but founders choose boards, right? So it's getting at that exact element that I was talking about. There really is something different there that is not the same as with any other leader. So for the founders in the group and the audience right now, I just want to ask you a question to reflect on. And you can either write it in the chat or you can just kind of reflect to yourself. But this is a question I often ask when I do interviews. And the question is, in your role as a founder, would you view yourself more of a founder or more of a leader? So I'll let that come in. I can't even see the chat right now because of the view I'm in, but I'm going to explain why this became a really interesting and important. Oh, here it is. I can see a little bit of the chat. But this became and continues to be an important question when I'm doing research, and I didn't realize it would be that important. So what I ended up finding is that founders who very strongly relate to the term founder. So regardless of how long they've been leading their organization, regardless of how long it's been around, I'm going to say it more strongly, are more likely to then down the road have founder syndrome. Whereas if the founder views their role as more of a leader, there's a different kind of approach to their role as a whole. And I'm gonna explain that a little bit. So the founders, when I interview and the founders say, I'm definitely a founder. I even had some founders that have said to me, please don't use the dirty word leadership with me. I have heard that. I have that as a quote somewhere. And it's because they so want it to be unique, right? They so want it to be like, no, I'm not just any leader, or they saw leadership as being in a corporate sense or something like that. And, they were like, I'm a founder. And, I think what's interesting about that is there's some founders that I've interviewed that are, 30, 40 years into leading their organization. And some of them have said, sure, I saw myself as a founder in the beginning, but now I feel like that's not even relevant anymore. It's kind of, it's kind of a spectrum in a way. So I call one side of the spectrum founder first and the other side leader first. And on the other side, the leader first founders I've interviewed have said, I honestly never even thought of myself as a founder in the first place. I just was always thinking, how can I support the team? And also, if I am no longer the right person to support the team, it's okay as well. Like I can step away. So this becomes a really interesting kind of litmus test. And of course, there's also everything in between. It's not just one or the other. And let me see if I can, oh, there we go. So I've started to kind of lay founder syndrome. I often say founder syndrome is a spectrum. I've only recently started to actually lay this out a little bit. So it's kind of living, it's kind of a bit of a living document, or living slide. But, on the extreme side, we have this founder first element, this very strong attachment to what founder means in the public eye. And then micromanagement, lack of clear delegation, lack of succession planning, no desire to ever consider anyone else leading the organization. I think that's what gets really tricky, right? It's one thing to not have an immediate succession plan. It's one thing to create one and maybe start implementing it later. But if you never, ever, ever think that there could be anyone else leading the organization, I mean, really what we're talking about is, if you've seen the show Succession, we're talking about Logan Roy. We're talking about the founder in Succession. Because if those of you have watched the show, up until the last moment of his life, he did not want to and he couldn't even consider anyone, including family members, taking over. And so, obviously that's a very extreme case. And then the other element is ongoing efforts to ensure that the organization's identity is intertwined with the founder's image. This part is really important because, again, in the beginning, when the organization is getting started, sure, right? No, that makes complete sense because the organization is still creating its identity, and often, especially for funding efforts, you need to kind of have the organization be associated with the founder's image. But when you're, 10, 20, 30 years in, is that still the case? Especially if you seriously want to consider succession planning and it's someone else taking over, it can't be just about you, hence the title of our slides. Of our whole presentation. Again, thank you to Chris for coming up with that idea. And the organization is always in crisis mode. So this is the important element of, if at that critical transition point, when you were growing as an organization, you didn't ask whether you might need different skills to grow it, or what kind of processes may need to be in place for sustainability, then what I have found is founders with extreme cases of founder syndrome are always creating situations to ensure that they need to come in and rescue it, because it puts them back into that startup mode, and that's a comfort zone. And that's where it gets really tricky. And of course, it's very tricky for the people working in the organization. And there you go. I just wanted to show the other side. On the other side, we have leader first. So there's almost no attachment. This is all the way on the other side. No attachment to the founder title, about supporting the team. The clear processes being in place actually becomes a really important element of the health of the organization, because it does mean delegation. It does mean the founder giving up some control, but for the favor of stability, right? Or for the favor of growth, for the favor of inspiring trust in your team. So that becomes a really important element. Delegation, existing succession plan with concrete steps of execution. And then, that element of being attached to remaining the leader, right? There's definitely founders I've interviewed who don't have founder syndrome, who of course would still grieve if they needed to step away from their organization. But again, it's like parenting, right? It's like, are you raising your child to always be connected to you no matter what, to always be, for you to always be around them, or are you raising them to be independent so they can down the road fly on their own? And that's kind of a little bit the distinction here. And of course, ongoing evaluation of whether they're still the right leader. So I'm going to show you a little bit from my data, a few other quotes. So these are founders that are talking about succession who do not have founder syndrome. They're all social impact founders. So one of them said, so I'm always thinking of succession planning. Who can I prep to take over when I have to move to the next? It's time to pass the baton on and let the next generation lead, let the next group come in. It's kind of like letting your baby go and letting her grow a little bit and then trying to influence her from the outside. So I'm very much in favor of it. And now I'm going to show you a quote from the board study. So this is a study where we have some funding from SHRC, which is a federal funding body in Canada, where I'm partnered with Carleton University and Imagine Canada on that study. And this is one of the quotes we got from one of the board chairs who works with a founder with founder syndrome, and who was trying to decide how they were going to approach this issue with the founder. So she said, so I'm not anticipating that it's going to react violently or anything. I think we can just get the conversation rolling and also show him we really appreciate him, and we want him to make sure that what he has so carefully founded and nourished all these years is something we want to make sure survives to his satisfaction. So this is a really interesting situation, because I remember I was talking to this board chair, it was maybe like October, this was a number of years ago, and she said, we've got a meeting in December, and she was telling me about it. So I said, okay, great. So are you going to be approaching it at that meeting? And I guess for relevance, let me say, for context here, the founder is almost 80 years old. So, there's many elements at play here. And the board chair said, oh no, we're not going to talk about it in December because it's too close to the holidays. And, we don't want to, make him feel bad. So they've continuously been trying to figure out how to speak to the founder about this topic. So it's ongoing. I'm going to show you a diagram right now, which is about this, what I call the founder pedestal. And it's the social structure that I have found forms around founders with founder syndrome. So in this diagram, the founder is the focal point. Then there's often an inner circle, which I'm going to explain a little bit later. Then there are enablers, which the way I think about it is it's staff members who are in the organization but aren't in the inner circle. And then the legitimizers, which are board members and funders. So the funding element, it's basically people who are legitimizing the founder and the organization in the public eye. And then of course the public eye is all of us, right? So what I found when I first was trying to understand this dynamic, because also I discovered this by accident, which is like, in a way, you know, when that happens, it's a gift in research, obviously, when you're not looking for something and you find it. But what happened was I first started interviewing founders only. And especially with some of the founders who I would say had the stronger cases of founder syndrome, I felt like I couldn't get to the truth. I felt like they were giving me like a PR spin, you know, like as if I was a journalist. And so I started interviewing people around the founder, both people who currently work for them, who used to work for them, board members, really anybody I could speak to, spouses sometimes, and more just to try to understand the founder better and try to understand the organization. But what I ended up discovering was this social structure element, that the founders who don't have founder syndrome don't have anything like this. There is no social structure. There's nothing protecting them because no protection is needed. So if you think about it, this is where the public eye and the image becomes really important, because if the founder has a view of what it means to be a founder, and they're trying to put that view out into the world, if there's any fear of that image being scratched or imperfect, they can't have it. They need it to be protected. So for example, if we think about someone like Elizabeth Holmes, it's a story, you know, I often like to use this case because it's a public case. You know, I think Elizabeth Holmes, and this was the founder of Theranos, for those of you who might want to look it up. She's currently in jail for fraud for her organization. And of course, that's an extreme case. But the reason why I bring it up is because she was able to get funding in Silicon Valley because she had a very powerful board that backed her and that opened doors. And it, you know, it was a blood testing company where the product didn't exist. It was like the Empress had no clothes kind of situation. But it went on for a decade. She was one of, if not the first female unicorn in Silicon Valley. And, you know, it really took a long time for things to surface. And I believe it's because of social structures like this. Another founder with founder syndrome who you might know about in the public is Adam Newman of WeWork, who is not in jail, but he's also no longer leading his organization. And one of the things I wanted to show is, this is a quote from a book about WeWork. It's called $1 Billion Loser. I recommend it highly. It's actually a great book. But this quote really struck me, where he was describing what happened. And he said, Adam walked over to the whiteboard, took out a marker and drew a large circle. He then wrote the word "we" in the middle. And he said, you're either with us or you're against us. Yeah, that's basically what it is. So to me, this speaks to the social structure, right? It's kind of this element of you're with us, you're against us. That means no one can go against the founder. That means the image can't be questioned. That means if you display any element of not being on the right side, you're out, which is often what happens in these organizations. So to illustrate this a little bit more, I'm going to show a diagram, the process that I discovered through my research, which is about how the inner circle is formed. And the inner circle is the critical element in this whole thing. So there's a lot here. So I'm going to explain the elements of it, but there's things happening at 3 different levels: at the individual, at the group, and the organizational level. So, you know, if we start on the left side, the startup, the survival mode in the beginning, people are drawn in often by the grandiose mission, by the promise of family, right? Welcome to the family, which is always, I say, a red flag if someone says that in an organization. And, you know, this idea of novelty and everything that's going on in the beginning. And, you know, in a lot of these organizations, there's actually an organization, I'm going to call it, I know there's some Canadians in the audience, and I'm going to call out this very important case in Canada, the We Charity case. The We Charity case, which that organization is now dismantled, and it's dismantled because of a big trial that happened in 2020 where the Prime Minister was even on trial. So you may want to look that up if you haven't heard of that case. But what I know about that organization that was around for decades in Canada was they very, very, very much relied on people who were coming straight out of university or college, as their initial staff members, and they would call them all interns, even if they had already been in the organization for a bit. And that allowed them to also pay them less. So there was like a whole element related to that. But most importantly, there was a certain loyalty, because if you have not had other work experience and you come into an organization that has these elements, why would you think it's a problem? You know, especially if you're inspired by the mission, you're inspired by the founder and everything that's going on, and you're in this family, why would you question it? And so, you know, in We Charity, that went on for a very long time and created a lot of support for the founder and his brother, who became part of the executive team. But what ends up happening over time is, if these first hires can illustrate loyalty to the founder, it's almost like unwavering loyalty, kind of like with the Adam Newman thing, are you with us, are you against us? Then they get promoted to an executive level, often even when they don't have the skills for that role. That becomes the tricky part. So they might hold titles that signal some level of power, but they don't actually hold power because the founder is still the one who's in control. And if we go back up to the top on their organizational level, protecting the founder's image at all costs is what they're there for, is what the inner circle is there for. And I just want to highlight here a little bit the external shock, little star. And that's related to, you know, often an organization, either to get funding or for other reasons, might need to illustrate that it has an executive team. And that's when these kinds of promotions, very quick promotions, might happen. There's an organization I interviewed within where there was a meeting, and the founder in the meeting said, oh yeah, this person's now our new COO. And the founder had, the person had not been asked to take this role, had not had any conversation before. The founder just announced it in the discussion because it was related to what a funder wanted. So I want to show you, just to go one step even deeper into this, you know, in a lot of times in these organizations, when there really is quite a bit of dysfunction, there's also quite a bit of trauma. And I have a study right now that I'm doing with Marley Mercer, who's at York University, about the trauma of people coming out of toxic founder-run workplaces. So here is one person discussing it. These were two founders, describing two founders. So this person said, the trauma I went through was huge and the effect was huge. And I think that there's still elements that pop up every now and then here for me, because my two bosses in their own ways were so overbearing and controlling. So there's this element of when you're in an organization like this, whether you're in the inner circle or not, actually often when you're not in the inner circle, there's just a lot of confusion and just a lot of questions of really, where is, you know, what are we doing next? And what are, you know, who's making the decisions and that kind of thing. I'm going to show you two more quotes from the same, not this person, but one person, but two sides of what they were saying. So this was someone who worked in a toxic founder-run organization for 15 years. He was actually a business partner of the organization, of the founder, after the organization had already been established. And he shared, I started to get ulcers and serious stomach problems when I just knew she would be coming in to the office, is what he meant. Or I'd hear the door open, she never came out ever. She's never on time for anything. So I started to feel nauseous and sick, and extensive migraines were getting worse and worse. And so then he described in the same discussion that there was this element of whenever he would think of leaving or something like that, she'd find a way to give him something else to keep him in the organization. So he said, so each and every time I would start to feel this is not cool, what's happening, or her behavior is inappropriate with other staff or me, she'd suck me back in. I'm accountable for that, with promise that things would change, a new contract, a new opportunity, telling me that I could drive this part of the business or something like that. One of the things he mentioned as well was kind of travel perks or things like that, right? That would sort of pull someone back in. So this is that's just a small snapshot from the trauma study that we just presented at a conference in Cyprus, actually. But, you know, there's so many layers to this issue. But if we come back to the element of self-awareness in a founder, I'm going to show you one more quote, one of my favorite quotes, actually, one of my favorite early quotes that I had gotten which comes from a founder who was a co-founder of a founder with founder syndrome, which, by the way, often happens, where one founder has founder syndrome, the other founder doesn't, and they often leave or end up getting sort of pushed out because they're treated like an inner circle member, and not like a founder. And this founder whose quote I'm about to share, she may even be in the audience, or she may be listening to this later as a recording, but you know, she stayed at this organization for 10 years. We spoke twice. Once she was in it, once after she left, and she had this amazing reflection after she left the organization. So she said, and for me, just being a CEO, people don't talk about the fact that the CEO is the person who does hiring and firing and deals with investors, and the girl who wants a raise or a title change, and that's on you, that keeps you up at night when you're like, do we have money? I really like her, but I don't know if we have the money. She's not actually ready to take on a senior role title, but we don't want to lose her. Okay, let's just give it to her to keep her around. Like, that wasn't fun for me. And I don't think people talk about women as CEOs or just the job of a CEO as transparently as it actually requires of you. And I'm not a good CEO, nor do I want to be. So why I love this quote is because this is someone who became a founder very young and didn't know that, you know, the founder really meant managing these things and managing people in this way. And she realized, to do it right is too stressful, and I don't want to do it. And I think it's important for founders to sort of know this, and to emphasize that, you know, just because people are telling you that being a founder entails XYZ, doesn't mean you have to actually continue to lead in that way or even lead your organization at all. And this is where I think this whole issue of founder syndrome is actually a systemic issue. It's not about one individual. It's not about personalities per se. It's about what are we saying as a society is what we want a founder to be. And are we taking away the humanity of people who are founders by expecting them to act in only one way? And, to me, this is an ongoing question. And I am very happy to share that actually in 2025, I'm going to be launching a lab to expand my research and to continue my research that's going to be based between Oxford University, University of Oxford, and Carleton University in Canada, which is going to be called the Founder Leadership Research Lab. And just to give you a taste of some of the other things I'm going to be looking at and continue to look at. So the study on entanglement, which is, we've just submitted it to a journal, actually, my co-author, and that is Bess Rouse at Boston College. That's already done. The role of the board is the one I mentioned with Paloma Rago at Carleton and Kathy Barr, who's at Imagine Canada. The trauma study that's ongoing with Marley Mercer at York University. And the whistleblower study is a new one that's been started as of a few months ago that's about whistleblowers in founder-run organizations. And that's with Andrew Mail, who's at the University of Birmingham. And then studies I want to do are about gender, about this issue of the invisible co-founder, which often happens. So to me, that's like the Steve Wozniak. So there's Steve Jobs and there's Steve Wozniak. There's only one Steve that we know way more about. I've often seen that in founder syndrome organizations. Another big study that I want to take on is about the funder side. What is the role of funders, both VCs and foundations, in both, in one way, enabling possibly elements of organizational founder syndrome, but also how can it be prevented, right? How can, in the same way that the board has power, funders also have power? So I just want to leave you with, I guess, one really final thought on this, which is, if you think you have founder syndrome, you probably don't. And the reason I'm saying that, and I know it's a little cryptic, but is because the truth is if a founder has even an ounce of self-awareness, even enough to say, do I maybe have this? Or do I might maybe have an element of this? Should I look into this? That already means you don't have an extreme case of, even if you have a little bit, you don't have it. You don't have it, because the founders that I've studied that have extreme cases of founder syndrome would never ask that question, because they're not asking whether they might be doing something imperfectly, because they always want to project the image that, they've got it right. So I hope that gave you enough to think about on this very juicy topic. And I know we're going to have a bit of a discussion about it now, but also I'm happy to stay in touch. You can get in touch with me at any of these places. And yeah, Andrea.
Thanks, Susanna. That's really brilliant. And that I'm sure there isn't one of us in the audience here who isn't nodding or wondering about ourselves or our approach, or have I done it like that? And so that really is a marvelous presentation. Thank you so much. Now I know that one of the questions, just to start the questioning off, one of the webinars that we had was about the hero culture, and about how not how the founder sees themselves, but how the world tries to make them into heroes. And I just wonder what you would say about that, and then make sure that everyone in the audience here is prepared for their questions. Please put your hand up.
I love this question about the hero element. In fact, in one of the models and one of my projects, we had this whole thing, the heroization of the founder. Thank you, Caitlin, for putting in all of the information. Yeah, I think it's true. I think it's exactly the systemic issue, actually, kind of that I was, that I'm seeing a lot here is, and it's really tricky because in one way, who doesn't want to be seen as the hero, right? In one way, there is some element of, especially in the social impact sector, it's like we are solving a big social issue or even a smaller social issue. But the tricky part is if someone views you as a hero and therefore not as a human, right? Because that doesn't serve anybody. That means that you as a founder can never make an error. But it also means that we're not looking at the whole person. We're really putting them on this pedestal of, assuming that they have all the answers or they're here to rescue us, right? There's an interesting element because being a hero means you're here to rescue. So, I think it's a very relevant topic. I think we all have to keep asking ourselves the question of what this heroization means, both for founders and people who work with founders. And maybe is there a way to tone it down a bit, right? Do we need to be that high on the pedestal?
Thanks, Susanna. That's a wonderful answer. Is there anyone who'd like to ask Susanna a question while you've got this great opportunity?
Hi, Andrea. Sophie had a question some time back.
Hello. Hi,
Susanna.
Hi, Sophie. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. I absolutely resonated with so many things, and I have a couple of businesses I'm working with at the moment, and I wish they'd actually attended. But I wanted to ask, I found the point about how founders consistently show up and act in a way that keeps bringing the business back to crisis. I wondered, how much awareness do you see the founders having about their role in that versus where they place the blame? And actually, what have you seen as the route to solutioning beyond, are they prepared to work for themselves, a coach, etc.?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Sophie. That's such a meaty question. So I have this Instagram account that's just my name, Susanna Kislenko, that some of you might enjoy, where I just make kind of videos on some things I see, documentary I see or pop culture and stuff. And I recently made a video that I called Whiplash. And that conversation, a video was inspired by a couple of conversations I had with friends who work in these kinds of organizations, who are not the founder, but who work with the founders. And they were describing situations where they were working on a project for months. And then all of a sudden, one day the founder comes in and says, we're going in a completely different direction. So therefore, everything you just were doing is null. We're starting fresh. And you can imagine the kind of stress and chaos that creates for them. And, I think the founder is aware. I honestly don't know. That's the real truth. I don't know if the founder is aware, especially if we're thinking of founders with extreme founder syndrome. And I guess the question is, even if they are aware, do they care?
Yeah.
Right? Like that's what it comes down to. It's like, do they care that they're causing disruption at the cost of wanting to remain the hero? That they're causing so much destruction and stress for the employees and everyone else. You know, that I have not seen evidence that there is awareness of that.
Thank you, Susanna. Nima, did you want to ask a question? I see you put something on the chat.
Yes, thank you very much, Susanna. I just wanted to understand something about most of the founders with the title of the CEO work hard a lot in establishing the organization, and how that part of the heroism coming. How can they keep the legacy and also the vision to the people that they are transiting to the transformation of leadership? How do they do that to keep the same vision that they have?
Thank you,
Nima.
Nima. I just wanted to clarify. Do you mean if they're stepping down? I'm guessing yes. I just wanted to make sure I understood.
Yeah, I think
Yeah, okay.
I think that's
Okay,
what.
yeah.
Nima
So in
said.
a transition. Okay, got it. It's tricky. It's not easy. And I think that's part of where, you know, and I think we've seen it in a lot of public companies, right? When this visionary founder steps down or passes away or whatever it might be, and someone else comes in and they are not visionary, you know, they don't have the same kind of personality. You know, there's this concept in the founder research called imprinting. And it's this idea that the founder has imprinted their values and their views from the beginning, no matter what. Like, you know, kind of like whether they did it consciously or not. And so, you know, I think there's an element of this that's about, for the founders who are thinking about succession planning in a really conscious way, then to me, you know, there's a few pieces of this. One is making sure that you've communicated that within and the elements that are important in the ethos, you know, when you're leaving. But then also, isn't there a certain element of maybe just trusting that it's okay if it evolves? Like that, you know, the nugget of you being the parent is always going to be there, but maybe it's okay if the values evolve. Maybe it's okay if the mission evolves over time beyond you. I don't know. It's such a personal question, but I do find that the founders that I've looked at that have sort of successioned out successfully and in a way where they feel peace about it, it's been a balance of both, you know, very clear processes before they left and then letting go, you know, really being okay with, okay, my baby's going to grow beyond me and I've done what I can, knowing you've truly done what you can to leave your values there.
Thank you, Susanna. Gisela, I know you have a question.
Oh, thanks, Andrea. I was wondering, hi, Susanna, thanks for the great exposure you've done. I was wondering, a founder who has a founder syndrome, looks like she is so self-centered, and therefore has difficulty to see beyond him or herself. And this, I mean, a founder, a CEO does need to be engaged with reality to face problems, etc., etc. The two examples, extreme examples you brought, they destroyed the organization, right? So I'd like you to talk a little bit about this relationship between, because it looks like that founder syndrome, I mean, the organization cannot grow as much, cannot develop so well because of this condition. I'd like you to explore a little bit this.
Yeah, thank you for asking this question. Also, I love that you use the word exposed. The fact that you said thank you for exposing this, because that's what it feels like, to be honest, to do this research. Yeah, I think, you know, this idea of destruction, there's a really interesting element with founder syndrome that I want to actually kind of keep looking at, because I don't know if I have a full view of it. But there's some organizations that look like they're growing from the outside, but actually they're like a house of cards on the inside, right? So the moment you touch it, it's going to disintegrate. And I think that that's what's tricky, is that I have seen when founders who do have founder syndrome, so don't think they're in their own way, and they keep just growing on the outside, right? Like if anyone looked at, you know, the organization from the outside, We Charity is a great example. They would be like, oh, it's growing. They're international. They have lots of funding. But the moment you touch a little bit, you know, it disappears. And so I think it's very tricky. I think that often the founders absolutely don't see that they're getting in their own way. Also, there's a founder I interviewed who doesn't have founder syndrome, and he said something interesting. He said, I have realized that as long as I'm the founder, the organization can only grow with my worldview, right? So as big as my worldview is, that's as big as it's going to get. So at the moment, he was saying to me, that's actually why I'm stepping down. I couldn't agree more, Kate. A family system runs in a family organization couple. Exactly. It's all the same system. So it's like, he literally said, I can't, my vision's not big enough actually for what I probably is possible. So let's bring in someone else. So I don't know. Those are kind of two sides of that. I have chills actually, even if as I'm talking about this, because it's so tricky, because sometimes from the outside, even board members, right? Even people who are close, they don't see it coming. And that's in a way, the most dangerous part sometimes.
Thanks, Susanna. I think it's time now for Chris to do your masterful wrapping up.
Thanks, Andrea. I've just gone into an organization as part of my mentoring duties, and the founder has died a little while ago, but the people on the board still sit in the same place they sat on the board when he was alive, and they still face towards the space where he is not. In other words, they face to the space where he was sitting. And so it's a fascinating case of you know, a board trying to move beyond founder syndrome, but finding it very hard indeed. Susanna, thank you so much for your presentation today. I think we've all really learned a great deal from it, and it's been very provocative in the right sense of the word, in that it's provoked ideas, thoughts, sometimes about ourselves, of course, which is quite proper and right, and sometimes about others. I just wanted to say that people are most welcome to visit our website and to find this particular recording in due course once we get it up there. And so there's no problem in accessing this recording. But if you would like to hear about our recordings on a regular basis, do join up. It's free. And if you join the council, then we can let you know in advance and send you the information necessary about the recordings. Our next session is on the 13th of November. And there we welcome Rachel Harrington, who's coming to us from one of the most significant wealth management banks, high wealth management banks, and talking to us about succession and transition from the perspective of wealth management. It should be a fascinating talk, and in some funny kind of way, rather sort of bookending your talk, Susanna. So we'll see how that goes. But that's going to be, as I say, on the 13th of November. Please mark your diary. I think the sort of thing that I took away was, here are a couple of things that I took away from your talk. I think the whole question of founder leadership, the fact that in fact it may be necessary to have that kind of pungent leadership at the beginning when you get into that startup phase, and then that particular transition between the middle period of an organization, as it might be called, and what you might call the mature period. And that often being the place where the founder syndrome then kicks in. And I thought that was very acute and adroit from my perspective. Your definitions were really interesting. And some of your models were very helpful. But for example, the definition, the need to control, the dysfunctional leadership, the protecting the image in the public eye, and so on. All of that rang bells with me and I thought were very important. And then going on from that, if you were applying a sort of diagnostic, then you would be saying to yourself, the image of the founder, the micromanagement, the turnover of staff, and the fact that the view of the founder is the only view that matters. And of course, something of great interest to us at the Elders Council for Social Entrepreneurs, the whole question of succession, or in this case, the lack of succession planning, or the lack of coherent succession planning, which I thought was very important. You went on and did a great deal more than I want to summarize at the moment, but I want to just call out that model that you produced for us, founder first, leader first, a spectrum, where you could actually play with it. You could look at where you were on the spectrum, as it might be, or where your client might be on the spectrum, and that struck me as being very, very helpful indeed. Is it the case that the typical founder who has that syndrome, is it the case that they have that desire to be the hero and to come in and rescue, like the white knight on the horse, to rescue the organization as it collapsed? And I must say, it's an interesting one. I have founded many organizations. I'm a serial social entrepreneur, and I have from time to time been approached by people who say the organization that I founded some years ago, and I'm not part of anymore, is now collapsing, and can you come and rescue it? And my reaction has always been, no way, absolutely not. And interestingly, they've always been able to rescue themselves. And so that's been a really fascinating bit of resonance from my perspective. You are either with us or you're against us. And how many times have people heard that, whether it's in the playground when we were children, or, you know, and that infantilism actually really was, I thought, fascinating. And the fact that people can actually, as adults, stand and say that is really fascinating. The people around the person with founder syndrome, the formation of the inner circle, and then all of those other elements that then went on from there. And the fact that they don't exist, particularly in organizations that are well structured and well managed, seem to me to be very important. We've learned a lot from you today, Susanna, and there's more to be done. I can see that you have already got a whole suitcase full of new projects that you want to carry out. And at the Elders Council for Social Entrepreneurs, we're certainly going to be very happy to walk the mile with you and to understand what you do next. And obviously, at some point, at your disposal, we would like to invite you back to share more of your research when you're ready. But thank you very much indeed for the moment. And we look forward to seeing everybody on the 13th of November when we interview with Andrea, Rachel Harrington. All the best and many thanks.
Thank you so much. Such a delight. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Susanna. Bye-bye. Thanks,
Thanks
everybody.
so much, everyone.